Do you remember your first cell phone? For millions of us, it was probably a Nokia. For a glorious decade, Nokia was not just a brand. It was the undisputed king of mobile phones. Think back to the early 2000s. The world was at Nokia's feet. Icons like the legendary Nokia 3310 were everywhere. These things were practically indestructible. You could drop it, step on it, and it would just get up, dust itself off, and ask, "Is that all you got?" It was simple, reliable, and the battery lasted for what felt like an eternity. Remember playing Snake? That was the peak of mobile gaming for a while. Nokia wasn't just about one tough phone. They had a whole arsenal. The sleek 8810, the banana phone from the Matrix, made you feel like the coolest person in the room. The Ungage tried to merge gaming and phones. Some ideas worked better than others, but that was the point. Nokia was constantly experimenting, constantly pushing boundaries. They were the innovators. By 2007, they were on top of the world. Picture this. Nearly 1 out of every 2 phones sold globally was a Nokia. Their market share was a staggering 49.4%. They were larger than their next 3 competitors combined. They weren't just a company. They were a phenomenon, a cultural touchstone. In Finland, their home country, they were a source of immense national pride. It seemed impossible that this giant could ever stumble. But as we all know, the higher you climb, the harder you can fall. So, what went wrong? How did the undisputed king lose its crown so spectacularly? The cracks in Nokia's armor started to appear long before the public noticed. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But internally, the company was becoming a victim of its own success. Nokia's culture was built on hardware excellence. They were master engineers who could create the most durable, reliable, and efficient phones on the planet. This hardware-first mindset was their greatest strength, but it was about to become their fatal flaw. The world was changing, and the future wasn't just about the physical device anymore. Inside the company, a complex and slow-moving bureaucracy began to take hold. It was a massive organization, and decision-making became sluggish. Different departments competed against each other instead of collaborating. Innovation, the very thing that made Nokia great, was being stifled. Brilliant engineers had forward-thinking ideas for touchscreens, app stores, and internet-centric phones years before the competition. But getting these ideas through the rigid corporate structure was like navigating a maze. Many of these groundbreaking projects were either underfunded, delayed, or canceled altogether. There was a sense that the leadership was too comfortable, too convinced that their hardware dominance would last forever. They were looking in the rearview mirror, celebrating past victories while a storm was gathering on the horizon. Then, on January 9, 2007, everything changed. Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco and introduced the world to the iPhone. At first, many at Nokia weren't worried. They reportedly scoffed at it. A phone with no physical keyboard. A battery that barely lasted a day. It seemed like a niche, expensive toy. They fundamentally misunderstood what the iPhone represented. It wasn't just a phone. It was a computer that fit in your pocket. Its true power wasn't the hardware, but the software, the intuitive operating system, and the revolutionary concept of an app store. At the same time, another threat was quietly emerging. Google's Android operating system offered a free open-source alternative for other manufacturers. While Nokia was busy perfecting its own Symbian OS, which was becoming clunky and outdated, the Android ecosystem started to explode. Manufacturers like Samsung, HTC, and LG could now create powerful smartphones without needing to develop their own software from scratch. Nokia was trapped. They had underestimated the software revolution. Their Symbian OS was difficult for developers to work with, and they couldn't build an app ecosystem to rival Apple or Google. They were fighting a two-front war against iOS and Android, and they were losing badly. Their hardware was still excellent, but people weren't buying hardware anymore. They were buying ecosystems. They were buying apps, services, and a seamless user experience. This is where the story turns from a cautionary tale to a full-blown tragedy. The decline was shockingly fast. Remember that peak market share of nearly 50% in 2007? By 2011, it had plummeted to around 25%. By 2013, it was less than 5%. In just 6 years, the king had become a peasant. It was one of the most dramatic corporate collapses in modern history. The company was bleeding money and scrambling for a lifeline. In a desperate attempt to turn the tide, Nokia made a fateful decision in 2011. They announced a strategic partnership with Microsoft, abandoning their own struggling operating systems, Symbian and MeeGo, in favor of Windows Phone. This move, known as the Burning Platform Memo, was a massive gamble. The idea was to create a third ecosystem to compete with iOS and Android. On paper, it had some logic. Nokia brought its world-class hardware design and brand recognition, while Microsoft brought its software expertise and deep pockets. The result was the Lumia line of phones. And you know what? The phones themselves were actually pretty great. They had beautiful, colorful designs, amazing cameras that were years ahead of their time, and the Windows Phone interface was smooth and unique. But it was too little, too late. The biggest problem was the app gap. Developers were focused on iOS and Android, the platforms with hundreds of millions of users. They had little incentive to build apps for Windows Phone, which had a tiny market share. Without popular apps like Instagram, Snapchat, and YouTube, the phones were a tough sell for consumers. It was a vicious cycle. No users meant no developers, and no developers meant no users. Despite billions of dollars poured into marketing by both Nokia and Microsoft, the Lumia line never managed to capture more than a few percentage points of the market. The gamble had failed. By 2013, the end was clear. Nokia, the company that once defined the mobile phone industry, announced it was selling its entire mobile phone division to Microsoft. The king was dead. But the story doesn't end there. Selling its phone business, while heartbreaking, was actually a masterstroke that saved the company. It was like cutting off a gangrenous limb to save the patient. Nokia sold the division that was losing billions and kept the parts that were profitable and had a future. Its telecommunications network, equipment business, Nokia Networks, and its vast portfolio of patents. So, while the Nokia brand name on phones disappeared for a while, before being licensed to HMD Global, the Nokia Corporation itself was quietly reinventing itself. Today, you might not see the Nokia logo on your phone, but the company is all around you. It's one of the world's largest providers of the critical infrastructure that makes our modern, connected world possible. They build the 5G networks that your current smartphone relies on. They are leaders in network technology, fiber optics, and research and development at Bell Labs. They've pivoted from a consumer-facing brand to a B2B tech powerhouse. The story of Nokia is a powerful lesson for any business, and for all of us. It's a story about the dangers of complacency, the failure to adapt, and the critical importance of embracing software and innovation. Nokia taught us that no empire is too big to fall. But it also taught us a lesson in resilience. They took a catastrophic failure and turned it into an opportunity for rebirth, proving that even after a fall from grace, it's possible to build a new, and perhaps even stronger, kingdom. Thank you so much for watching. What are your memories of Nokia phones? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories behind the tech we use every day. See you in the next one.